A warm welcome. We are so very honored and happy to welcome with us Joshua Simon for a talk in our public lecture series, ecm-Diskurs. Actually, it's the 17th tonight. Joshua Simon is a curator and author based in Tel Aviv and Lüneburg. In Lüneburg, you are researching on the topic of metastability, which will be your upcoming publication. And as soon as it is finished and published, we will re-invite you to Vienna. Joshua has been working as a curator, as I mentioned before, but also as a very influential author, in my view. So there is a very important publication a couple of years ago on Neomaterialism. And today you will talk about a project that is that has different formats and statuses, so to say. It's a hybrid project that took place offline at Vienna Secession for 3 days, an exhibition, but that carries on until the summer, I think, as an online project. And you will give us insights into it. Your talk is called Slime as a Metaphor, Experience and Material. And actually, you are dealing for many years already with the digital condition of our lives that is somehow very much influencing everything around us and within us. And you try to grasp also ideological undercurrents of this digital condition, as I understand it. And I think it's a very interesting and very unique approach, and I'm super happy to have you with us. And yeah, the floor is yours, and of course afterwards we have the possibility of a discussion, of posing questions, and so on and so forth.
So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Luisa, and thank you Beatrice and Nora and Mira also, and thank you. Yes, I think 10 years ago it was around this book, Neomaterialism, and coming out of that I did a few curatorial projects also, and found myself, I think, the last two curatorial projects. So basically, usually I give, like the way I don't want to waste your time on like what I did. That would be usually my idea of a talk, but because usually curators just share is one word, unpack like their, but the project that they did, right? Curators' talks are like that. Anyway, I will do it this time, specifically about this secession project. But usually my tendency is more towards like offering a theoretical perspective, which of course I will do, but tomorrow we have more time for that with the two texts that were shared with you. And I think you'll see that a lot of this project is informed by the digital revolution as counter-revolution, which is this text that was shared with you that I authored that is part of this metastability book, of course, and also has to do with my research at in Lüneburg. The text comes out of my work there. So I'm presenting this project and also discussing where it's coming from. And as Luisa was saying, basically the kind of undercurrents, ideological and whatnot, I would call it just the realities of the digital, in the sense that we're all in it. So there's no point in me. I mean, we have a few ways of discussing these things. You have the people who are really experts on what happened at MIT in the 50s and 60s and what did the American government did, right? You know, this kind of discourse. Or you have computational thinking from Victorian times and whatnot, and all these things. My approach is different. I start from where we are, like our experience, and I also see this as a conversation with curators, so I'll give you a lot of kind of my attitude, why things are like this, as curatorial, I don't know if choices is the right word, like that other word, sharing choices, all these words that have to do with free will. I'm not so much obligated to that discourse, but it's very much like how curators would talk about their work or about work in general. But I can explain why I'm not into that. It has to do with the condition we're under. So basically the project Slime tries to describe the reality of hybridity, as Luisa was mentioning. And with this, of course, it has to do with labor, first of all, for me. And I would give the example of, well, my mother and mothers of, a generation before me. So in the 1980s, when you were a kid, your mom went to work and she would call the house every few hours to check in. Don't hit your sister. Did you warm up lunch? I don't know if you're familiar with these. I mean, now it's on WhatsApp. But what happened was that the question of labor in the household was not resolved, while women were thrown into the labor market post, ununionized and so on, thrown into that, calling it a career. And then also our understanding of, like we even call it feminism sometimes, this way in which women both in the household have basically labor is on them and outside is on them as well, because the household cannot hold with one income, because this is, there's offshoring, subcontracting, all these things that are happening with neoliberal policies, and by then you need two incomes. I'm talking about, first world kind of realities, yeah? So in this situation, women have already experienced hybridity, and I think after COVID, it's on all of us. So you have to be available here and here all the time for capital, for the capture of capitalist accumulation. And it happens, and now I'll explain this kind of specific situation we're in. It happens both on the point of production and on the point of realization. I'll explain all this vocabulary. But I just want to say specifically, when we are in a situation in which both in the household and in the workplace, we are, basically women are exposed the most to these demands, something happens with automation, which is the current reality or current fantasy that drives reality, which is, for me, one of the ways I understand the condition of femicide, the mass killing of women by family members, partners in Mexico, Israel, where I come from, Germany, also Austria, the US, of course, that has to do with automation. I mean, it has to do with many things, but also with this double exploitation plus, which I'll explain my understanding of. But this is a phenomenon that's very well backed by, numbers, the amount of women that are basically murdered by their partners and family members in recent years. Okay, so the project Slime has a different tone. I started with a very kind of somber tone. The project has a very different tone, but it does have all this as background to understand where we are. So for me, the digital is not really this or that device. It's not, when does it start? With Laserdisc? With, I don't know, whatever it is. For me, it's a regime, meaning that it's a regime of meaning. So for example, if we're curators, what we're doing is organizing meaning in different ways. And the way that meaning is being organized now changes, and that has effects, of course, on how we organize politically and how value is ascribed to things, and from that, how you also extract profit from this value that people are generating. So the digital is a regime in which the way I see it, mainly what happens is that on a political level, we no longer meet on the point of production, but on the point of realization. And here I'll explain what I mean by that. So in the past, you had and this is like the past, when I was already growing up, it was already the past. Unionized labor was based on the understanding that when capital goes to the market, it has to buy labor, it has to buy machinery, it has to buy materials, it has to buy all these things. also train the people, bring them together, and then there's a contract in which both sides know that they're being exploited, and therefore with collective bargaining, you can make a claim together that for this exploitation, I want more, right? So for that you have unions. You're familiar with this history, right? And then there's the history of those who are exploited without being credited for that, because they brought the workers to the doorstep of the factory, and those are the women, again, who raised them. This is the immaterial labor, the reproductive labor, right? And the whole feminist history relates to this analysis, yeah? So we're familiar with this history. So this has to do with the point of production. With the point of realization, I mean, so first of all, point of production, of course, involves techniques like solidarity, because the sentiment is empathy, which we have as humans, but the political tool is solidarity. And there's no meaning to solidarity when we're all atomized, we work for different deadlines, separate employers, on different time zones, online, yeah? All the work that people, again, like us, I would say, do, again, in the sense of first world and class-wise. So there's no room for solidarity. I mean, we have empathy, and I'll go into that in a minute, but it's not a political tool anymore. And you see how politics is organized today. There's a shift from, for example, solidarity to conspiracy as a place where you can find yourself not even organized, but like an ad hoc kind of, almost like what you had at the beginning of the digital, which was called flash mob. Remember how fun that was? People go to a shopping mall or something. So conspiracy is a continuation of that logic if you think about it structurally, but just as a way of narrating together something that is happening right now. And how we narrate it, of course, based on this archive of conspiracies already, which is the internet. But that's the phenomenon that we're seeing. So that's just one example of the tools that we're missing. But what does it mean to be at the point of realization? So if you think of where people do manage to organize, and again, ad hoc, just for that thing, tenants' unions, it could be anti-gentrification, but it can also be anti-migrants. Consumer boycotts, political boycotts. We find ourselves in the market already as consumers and others, so parents' association, and there we make a claim together. And that claim is, in a way, already defined by the extreme right. So because we don't have access to the point of production, and with all the history that it brings with it. So under the regime of the digital, we're always subjected to meaning at the point of realization. I said I'm not going to talk about theory, but at the point of realization, we meet, and as I mentioned, from solidarity to conspiracy, but we also have from strike to riot. So strikes are a tool that was used for 150 years, that's it. Because of the fact that we were, under industrialist capitalism, extraction, and it was exploitation. That's basically the kind of the unique thing about capitalist production. But now we're back to the extractive logic that it had already before. And also riots were a tool to tell the prince that we had enough. And sometimes it will, there was a way to divert it, for example, in communities in Europe, to certain populations, so you'd have a pogrom or something for the prince to kind of keep himself out of the, but sometimes it was an actual riot that could be, a peasant's revolution or something, right? So revolt. So riots are like a very long tradition, and since the 1970s, they're back. In Baltimore, and all the way to 2011, you had it in London, while you had Occupy, or in other places, Occupy movement, like you had in Madrid already, right, since May of 2011, but London that summer saw riots. So it's kind of different technique, but in relation to the same social pressures. So riot is another example of the conversion, if we're talking again from point of production to point of realization, from strike to riot. I'll give more examples as we go through the project, but that's basically the theory behind this. And maybe I'll say one more thing, which is with regards to the extreme right and how it corresponds with the digital. What we have is a very complicated machine. Well, machine is not the right word, but like a system that pretends to be unmediated, right? The experience online is that I press a button and something should happen. So the sovereignty of someone like Donald Trump is that he tweets. But this is also true to all these kind of magic, supposedly magic solutions that always the extreme right, when it's outside, is proposing. But then we have 10 years of extreme right-wing governments that are unable to do anything. And the theory of Noam Yoran, whose text I gave, is the incompetent sovereign is really part of the logic of this fascism that we have in the digital age. They're in power and they always say, oh, but the courts are holding me back. Oh, but the migrants are doing this. Oh, but this. And then we have the phenomenon of what I call petty sovereign, where people speak for the kind of the nation because government is blocked because of all these things. So trans people are really in the way for something that we have to do. So we have to go out and do something about it. So the petty sovereign is like like a kind of a self-appointed militia that would do things to people in society in the name of the nation somehow. Yeah? So petty sovereign is another example of this phenomenon that comes out of the point of, we meet at the point of realization. I have more examples? I'll come back to that. Okay, so this attempt to, or this fantasy that we are in an unmediated reality, this is where I draw parallels between, again, extreme right-wing governments and, for example, ASMR or slime. So ASMR, you know this online phenomenon? So this suggestive gesture that actually generates in us a sensation, right? But it even goes back, like the opening of this book, Neomaterialism, the book I wrote, starts with this question: how come, this is from 10 years ago, how come TV is full of cooking shows and the only thing that the TV can't really transmit is smell and taste? What's that about, right? So that was an attempt to discuss materiality in relation to materialism, but it's also true here. The things that we cannot, right, touch cannot be, and there's touch deprivation, really, like I lived in the US twice, and that's really a, very, very problematic, this kind of touch deprivation, but we have touch screen, yeah? And so, and today if you navigate online, you actually move your phone, right? It's also like virtual reality when you have to do like Google Street View. You don't have to take your finger to go, you know how it corresponds with the actual movement of your phone, yeah? Okay, so this unmediated experience that is, of course, based on a very, very, very sophisticated and multi-layered infrastructure. So usually, here I go into the exhibition. Usually what we have as gestures to describe the digital, it's either the infrastructure or the code. It's like Alan Sakula, Faroki, or Hito Sterl, Trevor Paglen, right? Those are like names. For me, the digital is a social regime. And therefore, slime is much more of a metaphor for that. And I think of Charlie Chaplin, for example. He has this sketch where he's building a roof, tiles on the roof, and then the tar just sticks to him. So he's always something is, right? He's putting this, but then his foot, and then he takes it off, and then he has to take, you know this scene? So this is the digital. You're already in it. So the main curatorial gesture in the on-site exhibition at Secession was there were no screens. At an exhibition about the digital with no screens. Because all this Oculus, QR, just screens. My experience with the digital exhibitions has been that I find myself always asking, why am I seeing this? Why am I here seeing this? I could have seen it on my phone. They could have sent me the file. And I remember the last Berlin Biennial, like Kaderatia, there was an Omer Fast work in the Stasi building on so many issues, blah, 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 I'm not going to get into that, but just on a smartphone in like the changing room or something, like a tiny little locker. And there was a huge line, right? And I thought, I'm just going to email the artist and ask him to send me the file, right? So that was part of my, and this was not an exhibition about the digital, it just took as self-evident the digital devices as things that we would use for display. So for me, the idea was that we already bring the digital with us because of these conditions of labor, because when you come to the opening or to an event, you also have to be available for someone else somewhere else. Because we bring our phones, because we bring our internet eyes, internet, even breath, I would say, by now, it really defines our posture, our mimicry, like everything by now, because we took so many photos of ourselves and so on, right? There's no, there is a way out, but you know, we're in it. So that's why the exhibition has no screens in it. We did have 2 presentations, and those were by Anna Teixeira Pinto and Noam Yoran. And my idea was to wheel in a projector, so everyone has to wait for 5 minutes and see that it works, and we can plug it in, and all those things, because it's not, just to have this moment of realizing that it's not natural, yeah? The screen with us, with everything that it brings with it. So I'll tell you how I got to do this thing, okay? And this is to do, among other things, with artist Anna Witt, who has had a show that Luisa curated. And I had the honor of writing a text for the catalog. Anna and I are friends for a very long time, but it has nothing to do with our friendship, I think. It has to do with, okay, so she's on the board of the Secession. And they have to think of what's going to be the next project. And they all offer artists, right? But then they were celebrating 125 years to the Secession. And they came up with names of curators. And she offered mine. They all looked it up. And they said, yeah, why not? So there were 5 curators. They were asking them for proposals. And they didn't choose mine. And but then they contacted me. And they said, look, we liked your idea. Because the idea was about this hybridity. And they have their own way of thinking of, you know, the institution, how it's going to be more present online and so on. So it worked well in that sense. Let's develop it together. So it was very different from the way they do exhibitions. It involved everyone, which was kind of complicated for them to do. We had an assigned curator that I'll talk about him also. And we worked together on this project and involved really everyone in the house. And that also made a lot of people come up with their own ideas. And that was kind of one of the signs that it's working. So one suggested, let's do t-shirts. And the other said, why don't these t-shirts, how do you say, like, that when you go in the dark, they just light up? How do you say it?
Fluorescent.
Yeah, fluorescent in the dark, you know, different. And these are people, you know, one was from the installing team, the other was from the store. So they started thinking of the project. Okay. So this is the sign they made, because kind of slime is taking over the institution. And as we said, as I mentioned before, it had a online presence, which I'll show, and a on-site. So the on-site was scheduled for the opening the 16th of February until the 18th, so 3 days. And this is the latest version of the floor plan that we did. We had some physical elements, and I'll go through them, but also there was a program during the weekend that activated some of them, or that was acting in relation to them. And the team, in a way, I could say, was, of course, Christian, who's the curator from the Secession. And then this is me together with Francesco Finizio, who's an artist. He is an American from an Italian family. He was born and raised in Queens, but he's been living in France for, I think, by now, almost 30 years. And Liv Schulman, who's an artist. She's from Buenos Aires, and she's based in Paris. And so when it became concrete, I approached both of them with the idea exactly of how we do on-site and online as a process together. Because Liv is an amazing performer and video artist. Like, those are the formats she's working with. And Francesco makes these, he also makes videos, and photography also applies, but basically his installations are really, I think, very unique. I'll show you some of his work. But we had to have like a very stable, concrete presence in the space to have all these conversations around what we wanted to talk about. So Francesco, these are models that he made. Look how cute it is. It's called Tickle Down Thing, the work he did. And it basically made the cessation a kind of, this is also the models and some experimentation in his studio. And this is in the building already. This is my daughter Shoshana. With Francesco, he took, it's like this iconic space of the cessation, right, with its history and so on. And he said, okay, everybody who lives on Wien 1010 or whatever, this is where they pick up the online shopping. So we make it like a DPD. Cessation became a place where you pick up your online shopping, and which is already a reference to the building somehow. And especially, I would say, this grid on the ceiling, that's on the very physical level, but also this iconic space, this becomes a storage. And the installation itself was a mix of an Amazon warehouse that kind of people are inhabiting somehow. You'll see in the images, and also a place where you pick up, like there's a front business, and then they also make money from you picking up your online shopping there in the space. So that was the kind of narrative for the space. I'll just show you something that Francesco did in the past that I'm very, I was involved with. It's from originally 2004. It's called Contact Club. It's like an album of 26, you see these A3s, or maybe it's A2, that documents all these actions that he did in a space that he built, which is basically, this is after 9/11, like 9/11 2001, television, and it's a guy basically who's looking at the TV while on the toilet, and then reading his own feces, like to see signs. This is like the conspirative logic, but at the end it's all influenced by these photos that parents take of their kids on the sofa holding the remote control, wearing a diaper. You know these photos of just, because the kid shows an ability to hold the remote control, so you take a photo of that. He's wearing a diaper. That's what Francesco is seeing in these photos. So he's thinking in that regard. It's a very, very funny installation that also included a self-portrait as a remote control on the right, which is, I think it's already like such a great conceptual work. And this is another work. I'm showing this because it's kind of the power of the narratives that he uses. This is a bonfire of skaters that he did for a show I curated, a kind of a mini retrospective of his in 2015 in a museum I worked in. And you see, like, right, this is like post-apocalyptic, like they have to burn their own, like they're going to be the last ones to survive in the city. They have the way of navigating, the skaters, but they also now, they have to, in order to warm up, they need to burn their boards. So this is the installation. You enter and it looks like some kind of a business. And you already see that there are packages. And then you have this, which is like a shower curtain that already has in it a kind of an appropriation. So if you snap a photo of someone, it already has a watermark of Alamy, which is this company, like Shutterstock, Getty Images, an image bank company. So you can already generate that, but it's all physical because your phone is assumed already as part of you in the exhibition. So you see these divisions, and maybe people here are sitting on a break on these boxes. So that's how we organized the installation. Maybe inventing a game there, another kind of board game. So this was Francesco. Ulrich Forman, he's a graduate of this think he also teaches here. Ulrich, he is a data artist. So these are two meetings, one in the summer and one when we're installing. This is my daughter Margot on the left with the Uggs, and Liv, because they're talking about the documentation. Christian, who you met, Ulrich, and this is Yul Ko, a researcher at the University in Karlsruhe, with whom Ulrich was working to research this work that he did, which I'll show you in a second. On the left, you have Hans and Miriam, the installing team from Secession, again, together with Ulrich and with Christian. In the previous exhibition that was there, was for a long time. So, Ulrich makes these models, you see? You can see a little bit, it's a little bit faint because of the screen, but these are like, dynamic models you can see online. And as my understanding of the exhibition was that we're not going to have any screens, my idea was, what I asked him was, if we can actually, this is a test we did with cardboard and some holes, if we can use the ceiling for work. So the idea was that we make a kind of, this is Margot, the idea was to make a planetarium of these models that he makes. This model specifically is a map of conspiracy theories on German-speaking Telegram. So this involves mainly Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And I think, well, we'll see it later, but they really, they gave a tour of this map, and they explained, for example, the latest thing that was happening. This is a month ago, and 2 weeks before that, there was a big kind of farmers movement suddenly emerging, for example, in France. And they could show it to you on the map. That was the latest thing. But you have anti-vaxxers, anti-Semites, anti-Muslims, anti-migrants, hubs, in a way. You have Russian interference, Chinese, whatever it is. You have political players and media outlets, and they're all somehow connected with how they move information between them. On a kind of a structural level, it's basically very much, it's less actually like a constellation of stars in reality, and more like how water runs. So if you're into, let's say, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the movement would be between these players in this intensity. But then if you're anti-vaxxers, some of the players are still also into that, and then it plays elsewhere, right? Water just moves elsewhere, yeah? So content actually defines the form. If you're into this, that's what the form will be created, right? So you can say, maybe in kind of astrophysical terms, the gravitational forces are based on content, yeah? Because they're all somewhere on Telegram, but the way they connect is based on the content that they are sharing. Now, first of all, in relation to kind of display, you have the grid and you have the network, right? So again, Secession has this iconic ceiling with a light distributed in an even way and so on. And then what we did is basically to block it with this basically just cutouts. This is stencil, but it makes for a very impressive display. So that's why this is like a planetarium. So this is Ulrich and Yul giving a presentation. This is how it looks, from both sides of the space. This is Anna Pinto speaking, and this is Ulrich speaking. So that was another piece in the space. Another one was this printout as a vinyl sticker of an element from Albrecht Dürer's The Triumphant Chariot of Maximilian I, which was made in Innsbruck in the 16th century. And it's especially this element called ratio. Isn't it beautiful? So, what is it? There's like a tiny element in this whole thing, the circle around the word. But it's It's like a Jean Cocteau line, really beautiful. This is when it was while it was installed. This is where it is in the space. Also a little bit in the space. And my idea was this. So ratio is basically holding the reins of this chariot. The chariot is an illustration of how the mind works. So ratio is holding the reins. The reins are connected to 6 pairs of horses. Each pair is another kind of virtue, nobility, and the idea is that the horses are running, like you're in reality, things are happening. Through the senses, it gets to your characteristic virtues, and through that to your mind. It's an illustration of a certain way of understanding how our mind works. But ratio is, of course, reason, right? Ratio online, if I post something and I have 1 like, but then you respond to my post negatively and you get 100 likes, there's a discrepancy between engagement, that's very high. I got, on my feed 101 likes, yeah, through a conversation that's happening in relation to the content that I generated. So there's a discrepancy again between involvement, that's very high, and sentiment, that's very low, right? They're against me basically. So this is called ratio. And this is experienced by activists online, but there's no action online in a way. But it's experienced as, we showed showing truth to power. So for example, now in Israel, where I come from, you have the Israeli Prime Minister posting something, quoting this female poet who's from the kibbutzim movement, like a 1950s figure, to make a claim, some kind of claim. Her granddaughter responds to, now he has a lot of followers, right? Her granddaughter responds to that, don't ever quote my grandmother, she would have hated you if she would have known you exist, and so on, and she gets more likes. That's a ratio. And then it's been celebrated by people who are in online culture stuff. Oh, she gave him such a ratio, yeah? So, but the logic is opposite than reason, yeah? Because the algorithm recognizes something that is actually negative because it only recognizes engagement and not sentiment, yeah? So that's ratio, that's why it's in the show. Although Albrecht, I think in every show you can put something. Another work that relates very much to this kind of storage on the level of display is Elisa Jardina Papa's basically documentation of her work on AI image recognition. So it was on a palette, some 200 and something copies of this book that is a document. This is how she displays it. But when you would flip through the book, you see all these really funny glitches that she was trying to correct when she was working as someone who's training AI. In addition, we had in the space this slime corner with a slime library. This is Margot, my daughter, and my son Eliav. We had a slime library, and we had activities. We don't have photos of that, but basically we had activities for children where they would make slime. And that's this material, right? That, as I was saying, it has both a physical, tactile presence. It's an actual material. And it's also all this content online. So that's why slime stands for this hybrid reality. And the opening night, we had a performance by Liv Schulman. So this is while Miriam was working on installing her, this element that was part of a performance. It's called Sickness Unto Death. And it was timed with a cigarette. So a cigarette is one way of timing, right? Making time, 5 minutes. And it was timed with a cigarette, basically. So she had 3 cigarettes while she was doing this. And this is the performance. And it is about this kind of divided person divided from themselves online. So this is like documentation. That's how the divider looked like. As part of the weekend events that we had, there was a costume party that people had to be like Mikhail Gorbachev. And so we handed out temporary tattoos of his birthmark. And the idea here again was that you get all these selfies of people as a group or individual. With this, it looks like a filter. You know this filter with like you make yourself like a cat or a dog? You know this? So it was like, it's the same in a way. You get all these photos of people that have the same thing. So it's like a filter made it. Yeah, so that's how the exhibition was a way of physically doing the internet. Yeah, we were doing like internet things in the space. And another example is this, which is Sophia Stolz, who's a cake artist based here in Vienna, who has a strong presence online on Instagram. We asked her to make a replica of a Franz sculpture, and we got permission from the estate of Franz. And so it was this telephone call. So of course the telephone is also part of this logic of the online. And this is a little bit about the process. So you see this is in her kitchen. This is in her kitchen before she painted it. And this is the structure she was using to make the cake. So they basically defy gravity. This is how it looked on display. And then, in addition, we had Steffi Stankovic making a performance. This is the rehearsal. And Liv is looking at how to photograph this. So this is also a song called Telephone. Telephone? Yeah, Lady Gaga, Telephone. So Steffi was basically butchering Sophie's sculptures, cutting the cake. And the first piece of cake went to the person who won the costume party, who looked the nicest as Gorbachev. And then the rest was given to everyone else. And the cake was also delicious, which is unlikely in these things. But the reference is to this thing called Faco cake. You familiar with that? It's TikTok and I don't know what, like videos where a knife goes into something and either it's cake or not. There's also a game show on Netflix called Is It Cake? With like experts. And so again, it's the physicality of something that is also an image. This is really documentation of her, doing it. I also have a little bit of a video, but it was too heavy, but we can see it in the... Wait, why don't I do this thing with my fingers and see what happens? So, and Steffi's performance was, she did a whole story about she called it the spirit of ghosting, which is something that happens in relation to telephones. So that's the documentation, right, of this. And then to close the evening, we had Robert Bischbauer, who is a Zumba jammer, which is basically a Zumba instructor, teaching us TikTok choreography. And then there was a playlist of songs that have choreography on TikTok. You understand what that is? So it could be ABBA, and it could be Justin Bieber, and it could be, I don't know, like very different things. But they all have some kinds of movements. You have like TikTok dances for the face, and you have like for the body. So he taught us this, and for me it was like interesting because the dialogue with him was like he wanted people to have an experience and that they would be engaged, and of course that's interesting. But for me it's also anthropological in the sense that also people that have nothing to do with this, it's like listening to music in a certain way that could also be from a different culture in a way, because you're not familiar with this, but it is worthy of listening or experiencing because it exists as a cultural phenomenon. So we also had that. It was also very successful with people putting their phones, you see, like that, using slime sometimes actually to hold the phone so it doesn't fall. So this is Shoshana holding the program. Now also the program was nice because Francesco Finizio, it's an image by him, which he basically documented someone's tablet with all the fingerprints. So whenever this image appears, which was printed, whenever it appears on a screen, you see it looks like there was a flash on her, right? So when people got the newsletter from Cessation, which only had this image, on their computer it looked like they had so much fingerprints. And again, what I'm trying to say about, in relation to this is that the way it was curated, right, had to do with how you, I mean, people would pick up their phones to take a photo anyway, but would they think about the movement of picking up their phone to take a photo? That was, in a way, one of the ideas about the show. I'm aware of, I don't know, I'm processing the fact that I'm actually doing this as part of the exhibition. Online, we have a program that's been running since the opening, and now it's this film by Alison Nguyen, and it's starting today, and I'll show you a segment from it. And we have also documentation from all the events and artworks, like mainly video, but not only, also documentation from installations that will be online until the 30th of June. So that also includes Rose Selavim, Marcel Duchamp, rotary lifts, for example, as an early ASMR experimentation, you can say. So this is the video. This is like 1 minute. It's called Desert Disaster. It's like a scale thing also. But also materiality and reality.
Uh-oh.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh! There we go.
All right, so this is that. And then there are more works. So this is just an example of internet aerobics by Liat Bardugo. And as long as the show is on, they have this, the model has like slime on it. And there's a website we'll go into. Okay. So, and what you have here as part of it is actually this description of the work. But then you can make it more and more deteriorated with ChatGPT. So like there's a text, and then you can generate it again with ChatGPT, and then that text you can generate again with ChatGPT, and that, so it becomes a prompt for the next text and for the next text. Here you can ask questions about the exhibition also with ChatGPT. So that has to do with that. That's it. That's my presentation, and I can leave this with, this is like a beautiful documentation of the installation for when we talk. So thank you very much.
I was wondering if Brecht played a role in this? The
Yes.
idea of Verfremdungseffekt. This just came to my mind because I was thinking, so the idea is to materialize what is immaterial.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways to describe curating in the sense of like organizing meaning, that's one way, right? But also how do you do it? You make things sensible, right? You can sense them. You can sense a relation between things. So in that sense, definitely, and in this Metastability book that I'm working on, there is a whole thing about a shift between representation and demonstration. So you demonstrate relations, basically. So this is definitely where I'm coming from, but I would also say there's a kind of a Brechtian, I would say, open question, which is this question of hyper-identification as a form of critique. So, you know, we had Borat, but now we have Trump. So what's the meaning of Borat after Trump? Like bad taste was experienced by some as something maybe even, I don't know, subversive maybe even. In Bruno at least. Maybe not in Borat. I don't, you know, Bruno, it's, anyway, he's supposedly Austrian. So, but what does it mean after Trump? What does bad taste mean when bad taste is hegemonic? And so many other examples of this kind of a lacuna or like this problem with a hyper-identification as a critical position. So what does it mean with this exhibition, for example? So I gave you this whole theory, right? But then we play out the logic of things, right? So again, if we have as curatorial, as artistic gestures that speak of the digital as infrastructure or code, we have also as curatorial gestures. One of them that is very prominent when we deal with like big systems is the archive. But as a gesture, it doesn't really mean that there is an archive. But so I did a show in 2017. It was called In the Liquid. It was an exhibition about the internet, the history of the internet, you can say, only from materials from the internet. So we printed out the students' newspaper from MIT, who had a sit-in in '69. Noam Chomsky was a junior faculty then. In solidarity with them, there was I think it was March 4th, '69, that there was 1 hour without research against American military involvement in American academia, because they were against the fact that military budgets are going into MIT to develop certain things. That then it was called. They have this kind of this term, the counterintelligence thing. I don't remember how it's called, like as an acronym, but it was all about there's Project Camelot and all these things that are early internet, where basically they were trying, for example, one of the things to project to the future a scenario and act against it. So all this internet is like the algorithm is predicting your actions, right? It comes from, this is before Allende gets the power, but they're already doing a counter-revolutionary scenario in case of an agrarian reform in Chile. That was the model for this Camelot, for example, at MIT. So you could do an archival exhibition. You can do like do an archive. But I felt that also for me, it's more interesting to do it in this way. Also as kind of curating, I feel like my contribution, of course I work with archives and there's a lot of like dense theory and whatnot, but my contribution has to do more with things playing out, but also with like almost schizophrenia between the theoretical part and the experiential part. You have an exhibition, you experience. What you experience in an archive would, in a way, always be the same on some level. It's the gesture of the archive. And it's hard to, you can bring it in different ways, but they maybe won't be, just vitrines and documentaries. So, but that vitrines and documentaries doesn't matter if it's about the internet or about a specific place in a specific, historical moment. It's the same gesture. So I did some exhibitions like that, but it's less my interest. But because it touches the core of this question of an exhibition as a form of demonstration, you demonstrate relations. So that really is at the core of like what the idea was, like the curatorial conceptualization of this was. So Brecht, yes. Long answer. I think both hybridity and slime have a history of actually being used as terms that are from a, I would say, positive, emancipatory discourse. So, hybridity was put against a homogeneous identity or presence. So, for example, having, what's the word? Well, anyway, having a hybrid body, for example, having to be assisted by parts that are not organic, let's say, because your leg was amputated. I forget the word for like the thing that you put in. Yes, exactly. Yes. So that was explained as hybridity, but of course also on the level of identity, like a multiplicity as opposed to a homogeneous monolith. With slime also, slime molds. So if you think, again, with curatorial projects, Filipa Ramos or Chus Martinez or Caroline Christoph, they were all using slime or slime-like ideas about the mushroom, about all these rhizomatic, non-human agency forms that we can learn from, right? I mean, these are a lot of projects from the last decade, and many projects that had to do with that, or 15 years. So both terms actually come from, I would say, even some form of I would say, in some ways, feminist critique of against, for example, critique of patriarchy when it comes to identities, and well, also with this ways of, it comes from, I think, what is philosophy, right? The rhizome versus the tree in the raison guattari, as a model of thinking, rhizomatic and whatnot. But for being that I am more and of course I appreciate these things, and I'm a student of these positions, I was using the terms in relation to protocols of production and on the analysis level of production and the way in which a value is assigned to things. And so in that sense, hybridity has everything to do with basically the labor market, and it's market also in the sense that it's not waged labor, it's just constant generating of value, which I can go further into, but in slime also. So for me, a previous project that I did, this relates to your answer, is what's called the individual, and it was informed by 6 different things. I won't get into that. Also had an archive element to it, but it was an idea of being in the world not as an individual, with 6 different entry points. And one was forms of radical feminism, and the other had to do with holobiont and symbiogenesis. So one person, for example, author Octavia Butler, we showed personal photographs of her when she went to the Amazon, when she got an advance for this trilogy called Xenogenesis, called then, where she looks exactly at holobionts, like trees that have something growing in them that is some other thing. And of course, mushrooms and so on. And she later on used it for the description of these creatures, onkali, in the book. And so, of course, this very much informs this other discourse about slime, for example, and slime molds and so on. And again, I use this slime. I mean, I'm very much kind of educated by my children who used to watch these videos and play with slime. And it was a way for me to ask questions about this being in this world. But also the individual was about being in this world of the digital, because we are, parceled bits of information. So the individual, like Deleuze, uses it in the postscript for the society of control. So I would say, so this is like the vocabulary. And specifically when you say we're post-internet, sure, but we're post-internet like Okwi and Wezo uses post-colonial. Not in the sense that we're after it, but in the sense that we're all in it by now. There's no place that is outside colonization as an ongoing process when he describes the post-colonial condition for him. So it also affects people in Norway that think that they have nothing to do with this history, but then they realize, how do we have sugar factories here? And then, yes. Or, and so on and so on. So, or, this very moment in Norway or wherever it is that has to do with this reality. So I would say that I agree with you. This is a post-internet moment in the sense that you don't even have to do an exhibition that has digital devices and screens and all this aesthetic that we assign to the internet because we're already in it. We're steeped in it. We're in the liquid to an extent that everything is underwater by now. So that was the curatorial gesture of having two-dimension. So the cardboard, for example, Francesco's cardboard. You have Cristo, right? You have cardboard in art history. But this cardboard comes from the internet. Like it's obvious that it's coming from, because it's online shopping and so on. Yeah.
I just have one question, and it's about aliens. Because if you talk about slime, of course, I always think about aliens and this horror. Slime has a horror attitude for me, horror feeling, and so it's about biology that cannot be controlled, also cancer that's growing without control and that is eating us up. So could you talk a little bit?
Yeah, so Mike Kelly, American artist, has a text called UFOlogy, like UFOlogy, like the science of UFOs, where he writes exactly about this attitude towards slime. And again, and he is also very much informed by like feminist thinking, because this has everything to do with misogyny and a kind of a terror from basically female genitalia, and this thing that is both inside and outside, also the texture and so on. So this is like a reading of 1950s slime as an image with regards to aliens. Yes, that's pretty much established. You could say, also informs us. I mean, he was very much, but that discourse was about abject, also for him, like to actually bring forward this kind of aesthetic as a way of, critiquing the structures in which this is considered to be taboo or undesired. But again, I mean, I could say like on that level of like, where does I don't know how to say it, like maybe I won't go into that. Maybe I'll keep it for later. But there is something Puritan about this exhibition in this sense. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in a connection to the digital devices we have, because they're always slim and you touch them. And I just remember I always was dreaming of a texture that would be like a skin. Some companies try to find a touch screen that feels like skin, but it didn't work out. Do you know anything about this?
Yes, so Francesco, for example, when we had these conversations, he would say, we are the slime. And that photo of the tablet with all the fingerprints, he was really thinking, like for a long time, also from this Metastability, this Neomaterialism book that I wrote, this kind of Apple design, like this company for iPhones and so on, that it's so slick. It's also like Kim Kardashian's skin, and also Kanye West's kind of seamless bodywear. It has to do with that actually human presence is the thing that leaves, our body fat. My theory was that after the invention of this, or after the introduction of this, you had a hike in facial soap, because you immediately feel you're oily when you see your traces on this, right? So we are the slime in this sense, I would say. This is like the Francesco position.
My question was kind of about, I feel in the works that were selected, we talk a lot, they topically have a lot to do with this whole idea of labor, and but the way they're portrayed, they're very playful. They touch upon this idea of, for example, I also wrote down procrastination, like being lazy, being on the internet. That's this kind of idea of using the internet as a form of stepping out of this performance pressure all the time, which, I mean, that's my personal view at times. But and also you talked about strike and riot, and I think strike is kind of refusing to work, and the other one is like more active. So I think this this really, my question is about the works that you chose. I think they have this touch sensation. I was at the exhibition, so kind of when you were there, you have this idea of it being approachable, it having like a lot of whimsical and fun approaches, but then the topics themselves having this more stern and more negative, like negative sounds so derogatory, but like I feel that even though you said you don't want to have the touch screens in the space, a lot of the artworks had this topically, and my question was more about what about the entertainment factor? What about the strike? You know, the strike factor in the like topically in the works that you chose. Was that ever like a factor, or was it for you like a very clear decision? That's the one thing that we have, because it's an exhibition without screens, that there's like this weird feeling that comes up for me, that there's like the touch that happens in the room and the touch screen that happens thematically within the works, or was it something that just kind of came up because it was the limited space, or I don't know what, that you chose the works?
So I think, I mean, this is really, again, it has to do with a kind of a curatorial attitude. So I would say two things. One, I think it's Jenny Marx, his daughter of Karl Marx, but also by her own right, the person who came up with the term strike. It's one thing is stopping to work, but it's also a moment to organize. And the political theory around it was that there would be a general strike that would change everything. And COVID was supposed to be that. And now we have the fascism. Well, we had the fascism before, but it's really almost like a scenario from Rosa Luxemburg, how the failure of the general strike, the stop to work, doesn't generate the political project for emancipation and brings with it the fascism that we have. So strike is also, because it comes from actually a strike in a match company, like where they were making matches. So strike a match, right? You start something actually with it, this stopping. So it has a double meaning in a way. And in this sense, I think the whole exhibition even my attitude relates to that. In the sense that usually what you have is like, okay, you have this dense political theory or whatever analysis, but then the exhibition is this very experiential and so on. How do you come to terms with this? And then usually curators say, oh, but I left enough threads for people, if they want to know more, they can go and investigate by themselves. I'm not happy with that answer anymore. I mean, probably I was never really into that. I think you can say that the work of humor is the way to look at it. As you were describing these things, which I appreciate very much, because you don't know if with a joke, like you don't know if a joke works until you say it, and then it also depends on the context and who's listening and a million things. But jokes are just one thing. Basically, I want to say this: all art forms, in a way, are in the world and about the world. Also in Mozart, you have elements, or Debussy, that come from the world, even though it's so abstract. So you have birds, or you have traditional music, right, in the music that they compose. And of course, Brecht, or in art, I mean, what is the ready-made, right? It's exactly a gesture of, this is from the world, but it's about the world, as we're showing it. And so, this is true to all arts, I would say, but then, humor is the way we all use it, because you're saying something, and while you're saying it, you're also saying something about the way you're saying it, or why you're saying it, or the context in which you're saying it, right? It's almost like I have different roles in my life. I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a son, I don't know, yeah? And then if I mix it, I'm a teacher, then I mix it up. If I talk to my students as their brother or as their son, or, you know what I mean? Like, suddenly there's something that is about me speaking. It could be not funny, but it's still within the logic of humor in that sense. So that's how I see, the kind of the way the works activate the analysis, research, the subject matter, the theme, is through that. Rather than just saying, I gave them a footnote, they can follow, the bibliography. It's not about this, it's about the actual experience now. that already puts you in a place where you're thinking about the fact that you took your phone out. So you would have taken it anyway, but now it's like a gesture that is framed, it's in the world, but it's also about the world suddenly. So it's very much like what you were describing. I appreciate it very much because it makes me feel like some things, kind of some propositions actually were taken by, for example, So for example, this desert disaster, if you put it next to the rotary leaves, there's a relation. You like this Dushan, this records that they look like this hypnosis. You're familiar with this work? So there's a relation immediately. Now in space, you could do it, right? I mean, that's how we see curating in space has to do with generating these relations between things. Online, it works differently. So, and also, I could say, like, thanks to Christian, we were able to basically make a kind of a mini conference, an exhibition, an online exhibition, and a documentation of all this with a budget of one secession exhibition. And also for secession, it's kind of, we had to take over the whole space, even though it was just for 3 days. I mean, they keep these exhibitions for 3 months. So, and this is a curated exhibition, meaning that you involve so many artists and all the kind of work that's being done. It's not like a solo show. You have like multiple points of consolidation to bring things from, like production-wise, it's complicated. And still it was 3 days. The online part is much more simple. You have the documentation of the events that was scripted and thought of with Liv Schulman. So really thinking how this would be not just not to say it's there. I think things are going very well here. But usually what you have in a talk, for example, is that camera from far away with this kind of sound that you can't really hear very well. You know what I mean? Like this kind of, and then it's just on YouTube. And so Liv was really, like you saw, there was a rehearsal with Steffi for how we're going to shoot the killing of the cake. And there's a behind the scenes, like it's really like a Lady Gaga concert almost. She's talking about how she's feeling before going up stage and all these things. I had all these ideas about asking Ana Teixeira Pinto or whoever, give me 5 life hacks. That's like an online, but we didn't get to that. That's maybe for another project. What's your morning routine, to ask. So I was thinking how we bring it to the formats of the online. But actually what we have is basically an accumulative program. Always the last film or documentation of an event or something is on the top of the page. And when you scroll down, you see the rest. You have the ChatGPT element, which I think that's the thing that would make it, that's the thing that is reflective in this sense. You have a text that you negotiated with the artist, like, what happens usually, especially when you have to process so much information because of the multiplicity of participants, is that artists are already kind of used to sending you a paragraph about the work. Right? So curators don't start with like a blank page. They start with something that was sent to them, like an artist would make like an artist statement or something about the work. Yeah. So those texts exist, like a description of each of the works. And then ChatGPT just makes it worse and worse as a text and then it becomes just nouns at some point. If you continue doing it, it's just nouns that make no sense, especially in relation to the work. And this, in a way, has to do with, even with like searching online in so many ways. But just to describe, one of the ways, of course, is what happens online is that you are your own scale, right? Things don't have a scale. Actually, it pretty much relates to the art school. So in an art school, we don't talk to you until you show a work. right? Let's talk about ideas. Ideas everyone has. Bring a work, then we talk about it. Now the work is based on the scale you give it, because to studio visits, we talk about your background, your family, I don't know what, and then in the crit, I have all this information, and then where am I seeing it in your work, right? I mean, you know this from art school, right? So it's, you are the scale of the work, and from there we start. What happens online, I mean, at least, so the algorithm for Google was the MA project of these two persons that started Google at Stanford University. So this is public domain. You know how it, what's the logic of it. Then in 2010, I think they redid it. This is in Capo's book, who was here on faculty, Mario Capo. So what you have is a situation, I can demonstrate it with the wall, okay? So it's like you're playing, let's say, some kind of tennis, but it's based on your previous searches. So I'm searching something, and it's based on my previous searches. So I'm already here. It's not scanning the whole internet. It's scanning what I did. And then it gets more and more specific. At the end, you're basically stuck, right? This back and forth, you're stuck with the same feed over and over again, right? This is the funneling, the echo chamber, all these models or these expressions are based on this model that you are the scale of your search, so you don't know anything about the world in a way. So that's what the ChatGPT just performs that on our online exhibition.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and insights.
Thank you very much.